Okay, hi, political theology audiences. It's very good to greet you here. And if you have enjoyed all the contents and also our essays in the blog, and right now we are trying to do one more thing about engaging the new scholarship and also the new publications, which we are interviewing a scholar who just published a book and then see what's inside the book. So hoping that you are interested and then buy the book and then make it a conversation in your field. So right now we are happy to have Dr. Claire Blencowe from UK. Can you tell us about where you are right now and how is it there?
Yeah, thank you. Right now I'm in Bristol in the UK where it's very, very sunny, which is nice. Though institutionally I'm at the University of Warwick.
And Dr. Blanco just published a book, which is last year, in the titled Spirits of Extraction. I like the cover: Christianity, Settler, Colonialism, and Geology of Race. And it is published by Manchester University Press. In general, this book is about intersection between race, geology, metaphysics, and also the history of Christian mission, particularly in the Methodist tradition. So we want to engage more and then talk about the book and hoping you enjoy it. Um, I want to know, Dr. Blanco, about how did you come to this research project? Like, tell us about your past work or the journey of your scholarship. Tell us about you.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's at least two stories that I can tell about the emergence of the book, and I guess one's kind of more personal and one's more scholarly. In terms of my scholarly background, so back in my PhD, in my first book, was very much writing as a Foucauldian sociologist or Foucauldian historian of ideas, historian of the present, sociologist of knowledge and power relations. And my first book was about the concept of biopolitics, thinking about the impact of evolutionary theory, eugenics and evolutionary theory, and how that had been taken up in political discourse and political processes. But so thinking about critically about science, evolutionary theory, and how it inscribed forms of racism in the sort of in political structures. But then I became interested in thinking, in recognizing that, okay, yeah, eugenics, scientific racism, these things have been incredibly important, but actually religion has also been incredibly important in terms of shaping, structuring race and race relations. And I'm writing in the, working in the context of the so-called war on terror, rising Islamophobia, the increasing kind of uses of Islamophobia in politics. So I wanted to kind of understand how these how structures of power of race and political ideology aren't only drawing on evolutionary theory and science, but also we're drawing on religion, religious conceptions, and particularly sort of ideas of civilization and civilizing mission and so on. So I'm kind of interested in that and in various ways I've been trying to understand and engage with religious racism or uses of religion in the kind of colonial neoliberal racism of the British state and others. Um, uh, and also becoming like everybody else in the world, I hope, or critical scholars in the world, more and more kind of aware of the need to be thinking about histories of race, racism, and colonialism from a planetary perspective, and thinking in relation to ecology and so on. So that was kind of the space I was in, theoretically, sort of moving from Foucault and feminism and biopolitics to thinking more about religion. But then the interest sort of specifically in Methodism and John Wesley, that partly just comes from a kind of like a sort of family connection. That's the church that I'm closest to. My grandparents and parents and so on. It's a church that I went to when I was a child. So it's kind of what feels close to home. And I'm always interested in critiquing and understanding what's close to home. So there's a sense of kind of family connection. But then the other kind of origin of the book comes at this particular moment in 2020. So I'm living in Bristol, and in 2020 there's lockdown and there's the Black Lives Matter movement. And in Bristol, in my home city, that took the form of at least 10,000 people, despite lockdown orders, going into the centre of town, mounting a protest, and pulling down the statue of this slave trader who's had this prominent statue dedicated to him in the middle of Bristol, and a lot of other celebration of him in Bristol.
mm,
Bristol, obviously, having been one of the economic centres of the transatlantic
mm,
trafficking of African peoples. And so the statue was pulled down and he was thrown into the sea. And this kind of, um, rightly sort of made this moment of reckoning for people of for the people of Bristol, for the people of Britain. This kind of there was a much wider than there normally is conversation about the need to engage with our histories of racism, of complicity in slavery, of the legacies of that, and so on. And at that moment, so in Bristol, there's more of a conversation about like, okay, we need to, and to be honest, it's not already ongoing conversation, but it's kind of
mm,
intensive this conversation. Okay, how are we
mm,
going to deal with this past?
mhm,
And one of the responses of Bristol was the response of um, the the museum, the John Wesley Museum, because the Methodist Church was founded in Bristol,
mm, mm,
and there's the oldest Methodist building in the world is here. And so they see, oh, right, this statue is being torn down. Okay, this is a moment for us to say, hey, look at our statue of John Wesley over here, and and let us tell you about this other kind of we'll talk about him as like the anti Colston. So he's the person who was campaigning against slavery and
mm.
doing lots of other great things for the world. And like they'd put an ad in my kid's school bag, which come home and I like read this and I'm like, mm. Yeah. And I already have this thing of wanting to critique what's close to home, right? So I kind of like wanting to kind of trouble this. And at the same time, or at least quite recently, I've been engaging. I've been already sort of researching practices of child abuse in state in the states, like state-sanctioned child abuse, enforced family separation
Mm,
practices, and so on. And I've been reading about the history of the Indian residential schools
mm,
in North America,
mhm,
and engaging with the work of wonderful Anishinaabe scholar Leanne Betasamoki Simpson. And she's talking about Methodism as being a Methodist mission of being kind of at the forefront of the attempt to um, eliminate and obliterate her people.
mm,
So I'm like, okay, so we're celebrating John Wesley and Methodism as the kind of like savior of, kind of the anti-racist hero of Bristol. And then I also, there's also this, I know actually that Methodism was engaged in supporting some other instant other structures of racism at another time. And so I felt like, okay, this is the history I'm going to engage with. I want to know about Methodism and its relationship to race in the longer history of Britain and British Empire.
I see. I see.
Sorry,
Wow.
that was a bit of a long.
Yeah, yeah, but that's great. Like there are like a academic trajectory that shape you, and yeah, I look at your previous publications as well. But there are also like a closeness and proximity to the issue itself because it's just near to your house, into your home, right? And tell our readers why looking at Wesley and then Hannah More and also Wesleyan tradition are important to understanding religion and race. You have discussed that like the celebration is so common, like those savior who try to go against racism. While you were speaking, I'm reminded by Schleiermacher who also say the same thing. Let's do differently to the people in Australia because they have feeling, they will know Jesus. Let's do colonialism better, right? And in my research on Dutch Empire, it's always about that. Let's do it more ethically. Is it Wesley and the tradition is unique or is representative of a certain spirit of colonizations at that time and that period?
Yeah, great question. I think yeah, and absolutely this one of the really kind of central concerns of the book is about understanding and detailing this uh, like the good colonialism thesis,
Mm,
this kind of performance of the idea that we're going to do colonialism um, in a truly Christian way
mm,
that therefore is not only good in and of itself, it's making up for the sins of the past.
mm, mm,
So it's redemptive
mm,
of the British nation, of the colonial project itself. Um, is Wesley unique in that? I mean, I really, really doubt it. I think, people are very rarely, very rarely unique. And I think what's most interesting, um, historically, when we're engaging with histories, um, it's that they're always multiple, they're always plural. But that said, I think that the kind of positioning of Methodism, Wesley in particular, as a as an anti-racist theology,
mm,
I think does have, is at least significant. I'm sure it's not the only thing that's significant, but I think it is significant. And the kind of staging of a opposition between Calvinism as being about um, predestination and is about saying that some people are already destined to
mm, mm,
damnation,
mm,
and that being a really important um, way in which theology is used to justify racism, apartheid, and so on. Uh, Contemporary wars in Iran and um, so on. Um, and a kind of liberal Christian Methodist positioning of we oppose that by drawing on a Wesleyan idea of universalism.
mm,
um, yeah, I think that's it's referred to by lots of people in lots of
mm,
moments historically.
mm,
I think it's significant. I think it's influential, and I think it shapes some of the easy assumptions about what it is to be anti-racist,
mm, mm, mm,
um, and some of the assumptions that enable us to actually,
mm,
oh, not enable us, but have enabled institutions to kind of present themselves as being anti-racist,
mm,
as being about empowerment, as being about the good, at the
mm.
same time as actually um, committing, horrendous violence.
Hmm, I see. Yeah, I think that also what is also important from your book. Like people think that in the colonial occasions, the distinctions between civilized and savage is easy to pin down. But can you tell us why in chapter one you highlight that this is not necessarily the case?
I think there's at least three things that are important with that. So one is that the concept of like the savage,
Hmm,
the concept of the heathens, the concept of the poor, um, in 18th century Britain is absolutely being applied to the poor in Britain as well as to um, coloured peoples around the world. Like
hmm,
that, and you have the idea of foreign mission and home mission, and as these as being kind of parallel. One of many, many clear examples of it with Wesley um, writes in his published journals about how George Whitfield, who he's sort of working with at that time to develop a mission in um, in Bristol to establish a movement in Bristol. Um, uh, people say to Whitfield, oh, if you really want to go off and do mission to Georgia and go to the Americas and do mission to heathens, why don't you just perform mission to the heathens at home, to the miners
hmm, hmm,
of East Bristol? And they were these very famously riotous kind of miners. And so they say, so yes, so we're going to do that, and we're going to prove ourselves as being true missionaries, as being really the servant, people who want to work with the heathens by going and working with these miners. Yeah. So there's that, yeah, and the language there is just totally clear.
mm,
But this is, this isn't this isn't just the 18th century. This carries right on through the 19th century, and you still get it in, into the 20th century. A kind of application of concepts that are sort of racialized concepts that are being applied to that are being seen as applicable to to the poor, to criminals,
mhm,
um, uh, as much as they are to phenotypically
mm.
racialized peoples.
Can you say that this kind of analysis related to like typical, imperial boomerang Amy Césaire or Hannah Arendt, when the Europe encounter with the other and then try to categorize their identities, and then those kind of treatment, violent treatment, goes back to the imperial center? Is that what happening there?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and it's not even a nuance of Césaire's argument, but it's just because Césaire's making that argument sort of quite a bit later in history, like particularly at the moment, understanding the particularly the Holocaust and the far right in mid 20th century
Mm,
Europe as being a rebounding of colonialism. And if you look at somebody like Wesley, you can see that happening right back in the 18th century or before. Ron Ware's book, The Return of a Native, she's written about other contexts, particularly in relation to the workhouses and the extreme violence that was being meted out against the poor. And she argues that this was a very direct application of the skills that those same people who were the landowners in rural Britain were the same people who were serving in colonies and colonial armies or working for the East India Company, coming back and applying those same techniques of extreme violence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's fascinating, and I want to touch more deeply into what's happened in the extractive, in the mining sites. In chapter two, you relied on Catherine use of arguments. I like seeing Catherine use of here, and you also use Bovinelli here. The extractive practice moment is sort of energetic moment, right? Going up from the depth into the light, and that reverberates to the religious idea or race. Can you speak more about that? How is it relevant thinking about the extraction and extractive practice in the mining sites can help us understand race?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the attention to mining, and I should have mentioned that as part of the, very important part of the trajectory of the book was definitely Catherine Yusuf's work, and others talking about like trying to get us to pay attention to geology as a science, but I think really specifically like mining as a practice, as an economic practice, as one of the really important sites to be thinking with when we understand the histories of race and racism and colonialism. But it's also the interest in mining also just comes from like if you're interested in Methodism and you're thinking about Methodism, you see there's this real like kind of fetishization, I think, or actually, I don't know if that's the right concept. Tara Rowe, Shwen Rowe was telling me about why we shouldn't be using the concept of fetishization, so forget that. But there's a kind of there's a I don't have another word, fetishization
Or
of mining.
valorization?
Valorization, yes, valorization of slightly weird effective investment in the idea of saving miners
Mm,
and working with miners in early Methodist history. Yeah, and then also, and you see this in various places in Britain, but really, really strongly and clearly in Cornwall, where the culture came to be in the 19th century, defined by the 19th century, defined very strongly in terms of Methodism and mining, and the ways that miners were taking up Methodism. So there's this kind of empirical connection that's just there in the historical record and the geographical record in the monuments that we see around of a powerful link between the moment that Methodism is articulated and where it is most successful, where it explodes, clearly who it's speaking to, as well as where it's drawn to and where its kind of leaders are drawn to practice,
mm, mm,
and the nascent industrial mining industry in Britain. But other stuff that's been written kind of talks about it in terms of industry and the industrial working class. So that for me made the question of like why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Why does it speak to them? I think also that it's also just sort of profoundly resonant that it's with the literal kind of physical materiality of mining, the
Mm-hmm.
conception of redemption that's being put forward, the terms, the idea of rebirth, the idea of conversion and redemption as this moment of rebirth, becoming born again, kind of constant references of movement into light, particularly the centrality of exorcism and the idea of becoming Methodist, becoming born again. The theme of exorcism, of escaping demonic possession, is sort of so prevalent in Methodist narratives at the time but Robert Penner, amongst others, who say, argue that Methodist conversion was effectively being conceptualized and experienced as a practice of exorcism and escaping demons. And so to kind of realize, I think, with the ways in which this idea of kind of escaping demons as movement into light and as a movement into light that is process of rebirth that's also incredibly empowering, that's giving you new capacity, that's giving you new kind of perhaps miraculous capacities to do things and change things and transform things. How this is kind of parallels to the idea of taking metal from the earth, releasing it from these kind of demonic depth, moving it to the surface, bringing it to the light. And then you have this incredible capacity to do all the incredible things that like copper can do. Obviously, you can make the same argument about coal being moved to the surface and being burnt, and having that kind of energizing capacity.
I want to go to the last part of your book when you, after Bristol, and then you touch upon the Cornish diaspora, and then you brings the readers travel to the Turtle Island in the North America, especially in the civilizing educations. But here I want to quote you, borrowing from Evotak, saying there is a sort of quote unquote damage centered research or damage centered analysis that would actually reproduce the very racializations of indigenous peoples. What is the difference between your approach to civilizing education and compared to the damage centered research?
So the problem being that when you've got a structure of power that is operating by representing some people as being incapable, and then is building subjecthood and agency, most obviously for white settler populations, but also for bourgeois populations and for institutions on the basis of that incapacity. That's been absolutely integral to the kind of to the rationalization and the power structures. So the thing that Michel Diegel points out is that the fact that you're acknowledging that that incapacity has been created by colonial violence doesn't change the fact that you're talking about incapacity. And the other thing, book that I read maybe about the same time as writing the chapter I think that informed it is also Amitav Ghosh, writing about histories of Indonesia that you'll know far more about than me. But he makes this point that people keep talking about how Indigenous people have survived the end of the world lots of times. But the thing is, they're not the only people who survived it. The white people also survived it. And the white people took the lesson that they survive, that whiteness survives. And the idea with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada is the idea that, okay, so we're noting all of this damage that's been done. We're noting intergenerational trauma. We're noting that. But that damage is still being described as the incapacity of Indigenous people to look after their children. And it's still the case that Indigenous people are having their children taken away at vastly disproportionate rates, that Indigenous systems of education are still not being remotely kind of valued by the state. And you have people reliving their trauma and actually becoming more traumatized. So it becomes like a real is a real, I think that it becomes a real sort of challenge as a researcher of how do you write about this history where you want to acknowledge and understand the violence that's been done, but how do you do that without just kind of adding more pile to the various narratives and knowledge that eventually come to the point of white people survive, indigenous people are incapable. So there's maybe like three things that I'm trying to do. So one thing is that I'm trying to make it really clear in all of my writing that the problem is settler culture and colonial culture and extractive culture. It's not the poverty of the poor in Britain or the poverty or incapacity of indigenous people. So it's one thing is about just sort of paying attention there, doing critical whiteness studies rather
Mm.
than kind of poverty studies, should we
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then so the other aspect was to be placing as much as possible Indigenous people's agency as the topic of the narrative. We're not just sort of saying, oh, and the missionaries came and they did this. And try to go much more into saying what were people's lives, what were the power situations that people were in, and to talk about people like Chief Shingwokasensei. I'm going to get that name wrong. Little Pine is his English name, and how their engagements with missionaries were involved a part of their strategies for survival, for community building, for negotiating
Mm,
a complex and ongoing reality.
mm, mm,
The final thing with it that I think was really important to me in the writing, and I hope we don't conclude with a story of the damage that was done. We conclude with a story of the ways in which contemporary Anishinaabe activists are resisting,
mm, mm.
um,
Yeah,
refusing dispossession, and it concludes with the concept of Liambata Somataki Simpson and Glenn Coulthard and their
mm,
conceptualization of grounded normativity as being the refusal of
yeah.
dispossession.
Yeah, just for the readers, you are referring to page 172 and 173, where the extractivist exorcism entails departure and flight, grounded normativity entails attention. The affirmation and practice of grounded normativity, which is loving connection with and learning from the land and all its life, are not only the reversal of dispossession, but also refusal of extractivist exorcisms, evangelical pedagogy, and the civilizational metaphysics of race. I think that's a good way to close the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, enough about the content about the book. I want tell us before we close, tell us about your experience writing it. And if I'm not mistaken, without footnotes, the book is actually only comprised of 150 pages each. But the book already accomplished a lot. Like, can you share of the experience of deciding the style, genre, numbers of chapters?
Yeah, so I don't think I'd realized that it was like a short book, but you're not the first person to say, oh, it's a short book. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Maybe I could have put in a bit more breathing space into some of the really dense bits where I'm like, and this and this and this and this. But it was a deliberately fairly short book. Partly because it was quite important to me that it's readable. One of the things I've been doing in the years leading up to it is I've been teaching a module to undergraduate students on religion and planetary crisis. I love those students and I loved that module, and I gave them a draft chapter of the book and they found it readable, and that really meant a lot to me. So I was like, okay, I can do something that's readable. So I want it to be readable, and personally, I find shorter books more readable. So, in terms of the form, so it's a book that's telling a lot of stories. It's a book that's also trying to develop a lot of theory and engage with these kind of big concepts and maybe suggest a few new concepts. And I always want to make the theoretical argument
Mm, mm,
through giving a story and through giving a history. But so when I had the book kind of in its the first draft that had gone to reviewers, and I kind of at that point the book was longer and it had more chapters in it that were, I wouldn't say that were theory as opposed, because I think the whole book is engaging with theory, but I had chapters in it that were like, I guess, engaging, that were sort of like literature reviews. It just didn't, it wasn't quite landing. It wasn't quite kind of having the impact that I wanted it to have. And I sort of just kind of took out all of the sort of literature review stuff. There's little bits of it that stay in various places, but that I really wanted to focus on having um, in trying to tell the whole story through and do all of the kind of theoretical argument through historical moments that I also came to think of as affective scenes, as being sort of places where we explore a set of relations, a set of investments, and so on. And then it's each of those, and then around these three moments, then we've got an introduction and an afterword that both talk about very much my present moment and my present place, and talk about Bristol. So that story that I had that I shared before around Edward Colston and so on, and the Black Lives Matters protest and what that demands from a contemporary resident of Bristol. And then concluding the book, I have this afterword where I come back into the moment that I'm writing the book, which was 20 and 24 at the time, and trying to reflect on how what I've called an extractivist exorcist aesthetic, the linking of demonizing people with the continued production of the power of extractive industries and of national sovereignty, how that is unfolding in the present political moment in Bristol, in a moment of protest. So and it starts actually with a moment of protest and this pulling down of the statue and this protest that kind of flies around the world in images and is kind of really successful, and these people who don't get prosecuted because good people of the jury in Bristol say no, they were doing the right thing, and they don't get prosecuted, to the chagrin of the Home Secretary of Britain and so on, to 2024, just 4 years later, when you have a huge crackdown on protest. You have young kids being thrown in prison for kicking the shield, kicking a bit of plastic next to a policeman. You have the Palestine Action protesters being classified as terrorists for protesting against arms manufacturers and so on.
Yeah, that's what I also get from the book. One last question, two sides. One, if you return again to writing this book, anything you could have done differently? And then the last question is like any project you are working on.
Thank you. Yeah. What I could have done differently. I think I could have put a bit more breathing space in the book. To be honest, I was rereading a chapter and I was like, there could just be a few more pauses for breath here. And another thing that I really wish I had done, and it was a suggestion by Nagar Balazi, who kindly read the book. She said it was a shame that I hadn't engaged more with the stories of miners. I realized that's really true. I could have done that a lot more, because I engaged with the stories of missionaries, and I engaged with the stories of indigenous people in Canada who are confronting geologists and missionaries and so on. But I haven't really got in there the stories of like Bristolian or Cornish miners. Yeah, so I wish I'd done that, actually. But I think it's when something's so close to home, you've sort of grown up with something, you think you know it, you think it's sort of obvious, and then not actually do work. So yeah. In terms of what I'm doing now, very, very much continuing with the theme of religion and mining and race, religious racism, but in a very different mode. So I'm not so much continuing with the historical work, but I'm launching a new project. It's called Religious Authority in Extractive Industry Struggles, or RAID. And the idea is to be kind of investigating sort of some of these relationships between dominant religion and the extractive industries and the support of the extractive industries, but in the contemporary world. And I'm going to be looking particularly at religious nationalism and how religious nationalism is supporting governments and who are supporting corporations who are participating in the huge expansion of extractive industry. But also, the project will also be looking at the ways that people are using religion and spiritual practice or spiritual community in their resistance to in their sort of frontline struggles against mining corporations. So it's trying to look at the role of religion on both sides of struggles about mining.
Yeah.
And that's going to be looking at the USA, Brazil, India, and Indonesia.
Yeah.
So quite a different scale.
I'm looking forward then. You mentioned Indonesia and the US, but I think this is a perfect time to write about it and then to talk about it. Yeah. Thank you for your time being in conversation, and then tell about your book to our audience. Just to audience of Political Theology Network, you can use this book as an example, as digging deeper into Methodist tradition, and also thinking about the extraction and religions in general, or also because our network talks about politics and religion, so this also talks talks about that too. Again, looking forward to other further conversation and also other books to be unpacked in Political Theology Network. Thank you very much.